You're in the rant wormhole where I rant about whatever my $15 a month plus patrons ask me to rant about. You can get one if you become one. This one is from Miki Stopwatch requesting I talk about Osamu Dezaki, preferably why I've dropped his shows, but whatever you think will be most interesting is best, obviously. So, Osamu Dezaki. The man made a lot of fucking anime. And a lot of it is very long. He started in the late 70s, I want to say. And, most of his shows are like 50, 39 episode counts, stuff like that. And a lot of them are dramas, sometimes adapting either manga or like world masterpiece theater type stuff. He directed Nobody's Boy Remy, I believe, and Takarajima, and then he has all these manga adaptations, Space Adventure Cobra, which I've seen most of and really like, but I never did finish. I think I probably saw 2/3 of it, and stuff like Oni-sama A, and the tennis one, and Ashita no Joe, and Rose of Versailles. I've watched bits and pieces of all of these, and a lot of the time the only reason I dropped it is because they're so fucking long, and I just don't think I'm ever gonna get around to it. So with Ashita no Joe, I watched the first episode of that probably in 2007 or 8. I had not really watched any old anime at the time. Old by the standard of, older than me. So, I'd seen plenty of shit from the 90s and 2000s because I grew up with it. And I had been leaping back and, watching more of the, hardcore shit that hadn't gotten released in America from that time period. So I'd seen tons of anime. But going back to the 80s was terrifying to me because everything looked fucking different and, more than anything, sounded terrible. Because, I remember the audio on fucking Ashita no Joe episode 1 just being, too much for me to handle. And, I still have trouble going back to mega old shows just for the audio, but I'm getting better at it. Just because, I listen to harsher and harsher shit in my own time anyways. So, oh god, I lost track of my... Right, I'm talking about fucking... Osamu Dezaki. I watched episode 1 of Ashita no Joe and just thought, this seems like it could be good, but it's so long and it's so old. Why would I ever choose this over something else I could watch? Probably is my thought process. So then I watched 8 episodes of Rose of Versailles, and I was a lot more into that because I've always been into gender dynamics in TV shows and shit like that. So, I was enjoying it, but it's just that the style of most of these old dramas is that everyone is just a cunt for no fucking reason. It's just everyone in the world is out to get the protagonist. Whoever is the protagonist is always just fucking a kid with a heart of gold, just an innocent child who's being fucking torn apart by everybody else. Midori is the most extreme version of this type of story, but just the bullying shit that goes on in so many anime, especially from this era. It's the point of the story is just to have as many bad things happen to this character as possible, without them dying. And Rose of Versailles, it's not quite so intense as that. Nobody's Boy Remy is more of that type of show, but it's that atmosphere of just the villains are just insanely catty, pretentious assholes who are trying to murder or just fuck up the life of the main character just because they don't like them, And that shit is constant in a lot of these older anime, and I am just not a huge fan of those stories because they're so heavy-handed at trying to get you to sympathize with the main character, and it just is grueling to watch these people get beat up on for so long. So, that would be why some of his early shows I didn't watch more of. Takarajima, I watched the first episode and sincerely enjoyed, but it was just another one, this was probably in 2009 or so I was I'd seen a little more old shit than I had a couple years prior, but I still was just this is really long and I'm never going to get back around to watching it. Because, Dezaki was not particularly known to me at the time. Like, I knew that he was important, that he had directed a bunch of these shows, and he was influential to some of the people I cared about. After he died, I wrote like a little thing about him on my blog, just like posting the picture of like Joe, resting against the ropes because of the fact that I know that scene because it's referenced in Gurren Lagann, and of course Gurren Lagann was like my favorite anime. So like this is why I know what Ashita no Joe is and who Dezaki is, but like I hadn't watched any of his shows or like really heard enough talk about him to think of him as like a legend because people. It wasn't until more recently that people started really shining a light very publicly on all of these like classic anime directors. Whereas, like, you could find writing about them if you were on something like Annie Pages, where, like, that guy he knows everything about everyone in the industry and was writing interesting stuff about it in the early 2000s, but not a ton of people were reading that blog, and, like, but people who were spiraled out and they made more blogs and those people made YouTube channels and the people who have YouTube channels watch the smaller YouTube channels and they learn about the deeper stuff and everybody's trying to trade knowledge and like get more eyeballs on classic stuff and like if you're on on who Osamu Dezaki is because you're not going to go into anybody's favorites thread and not see it everywhere because people want to taste check you. So, like, you're definitely going to see some shit from World Masterpiece Theater, either if it's from him or from Takahata. So, like, yeah, I watched most of Cobra just because I knew some guys who were, like, talking about how it was, like, a cool, badass, manly anime from the 80s, and, like, I was into that at the time, and I watched it with a friend who I knew would be into its aesthetic. So, like, we made it like 23 episodes in and had a great time, just never got around to finishing it. But, like, so Osamu Dezaki is known for his aesthetics. Like, he was one of the first, like, super strong visual directors. He's one of the core members of Madhouse. Everything they do is visuals and aesthetics. And, like, he had a lot of really striking shit that he did. I'm a huge fan of the harmonies technique, which is where he, like, cuts to a hand-drawn portrait of, like, a dramatic moment. And, like, lots of people have copied it. It's used in tons of anime because of his influence. But, like, I love that effect every time it's used in anything. But he also has stuff like, dramatically showing the same moment 3 times in a row, or doing, like, goofy pans and zooms and, like, too much like glinting light off of fucking metal, or like some of his shows are heart-stoppingly beautiful. Like the first episode of Nobody's Boy Remy is one of the best looking things I've ever fucking seen. So like, and a big part of that is also because of the background artist who I've done a video about before, Shinichiro Kobayashi. But like, if you fucking watch that show and then watch one of his other things, it's like you get a sense of how much of it is him being a genius visual director and him having like an amazing team on that show and that amazing background artist. Even though they worked together on most of the stuff they did together, like they just like, I think he complimented that guy really well, and he was able to sometimes bring out like aesthetically amazing moments. But I just don't think all of his directing techniques were necessarily the coolest thing I've ever seen. Like, I think that people who were influenced by him had stronger visual direction in the end. Like, I don't think that, I've seen the first episode of Onisama A, for instance, and I remember thinking that it was like a little over the top with how dramatic it was, and like how much it used harmonies like over and over again for every punch moment that there was, and like it was kind of goofy, and I was like, I don't know if I would compare this to be on the same visual level of like some of my favorite Shaft shows or something, so like, because Akiyuki Shinbo is one of my favorite aesthetic directors, and he might not even bring the same level of technicality to the table on any of his shows in terms of like what the staff is doing, but like the visuals are more striking to me and more memorable overall than in most of Dezaki's work. But there is some, images from his shit that I'm always going to take with me. I guess what I'm just trying to say is that I respect the dude and I think his work is great. I just don't feel this intense burning desire to like score through his catalog the way I would like Hideaki Anno, where like his visual style speaks to me so hard that I needed to see everything he had done. And also that's just much easier to do than it is with a guy who directed like 12 shows that are 50 episodes long. So hopefully that's a satisfying answer to this question, because there's always complicated reasons for why I've dropped a bunch of bullshit over the course of fucking 10, 15 years that I've been, watching all kinds of random stuff. So, like, it's not always like that I have any strong or good reason. A lot of the times it's a stupid and bad reason. There's your rant.